Hi, thank you so much for being here today. I'm instructor Dwayne Jenkins. In today's video lesson, we're going to be talking about a question that I get asked a lot by some students over the years, and just recently I had another person ask me about it, and the question is, what's the difference between a solid state and a tube amp, and which is better to get, okay? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now before we do, be sure to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for future notifications, and if you feel that you've gotten some value out of this video, please let me know in the comments below. I'd really appreciate that, okay? So let's take a look at what the difference between the solid state and a tube amplifier. All right, now it kind of depends on what your application is for, okay? There's different things with them. They both have pros and cons, so let's take a look at a little bit of them individually here. Let's start with the solid state amp, okay? Your solid state amp is made of electronics, okay? Your tube amp is made out of tubes, okay? Glass tubes that give you kind of more of a natural sound. But let's take a look at the solid state. Number one, your solid state is going to be a cheaper amplifier because it doesn't have the transformers, it doesn't have the glass tubes in it. It's all just circuit board and electronics, okay? So it's going to be a lot less expensive. So that's the first thing that you want to think about, okay? Number two, because of it doesn't have the transformers and the tubes, it's going to be a lot lighter, okay? So if you're transporting it back and forth, you know, it's going to be a lot lighter to transport, okay? So that's another thing to think about. That's really good about it. Another thing that's great about the solid state is because the fact that it's, you know, circuit board with transistors and things like that in it, and it's electronic, it has a lot more features. You can add effects and all kinds of stuff in there that you don't really get with tube amps, okay? So that's the other thing that's great about it. And the last thing that's really great about solid state is you can get that massive gain at a low volume, okay? Usually with tube amps, you got to turn them up to really get the sound you want, okay? And that's why solid state became popular in the first place, is because of the fact that you could get that full-blown rock sound at a low volume, okay? Now the cons of the solid state is the fact that it just doesn't quite give you that natural sound that the tubes give you, okay? Now they are making them better nowadays. Nowadays they're making them a lot better than they used to be. You know, a long time ago, say 30 years ago when they were making them, 40 years ago, they sounded kind of synthetic, you know? But because they were lightweight, because they had more features, and because they were cheaper to buy, they became very popular, okay? But I think nowadays people are starting to go back to that tube sound because they realize it's just got that natural sound. But they are making solid state amps a lot better now. Now they're starting to make kind of hybrid of a little bit of both, you know, maybe a tube power amp with a solid state preamp, so you get the kind of the tube sound and the effects as well, okay? So that's something to think about too, okay? Now let's take a look at our tube amps, all right? Now the great thing about the tube amps is it gives you a natural sound. When you plug into it, you're getting a natural sound because of the tubes, okay? The tubes just give you a natural sound that you really don't get from the electronics of a solid state. And that's what's great about the tube amps. And if you ever, you know, plug into one, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, okay? So that's the great thing about that. And what's great about these, and it's one of the reasons why rock and roll is loud, is because the more you turn them up, the better they sound, because they're kind of designed that way. The tubes get hot, and the more you turn them up, the better they sound, and they don't break up like solid state amps. Like solid state amps, usually when you turn them up past a certain point, they start to break up and distort and not sound good. So they have kind of a threshold, as where a lot of times with tube amps, the more you turn them up, the better they sound. And that's why, you know, people who don't play guitar don't realize that. Why do the guitar players turn their amps up so loud? Well, it's because when you're playing through a tube amp, it's designed that way that when you turn it up, it starts sounding better. You're like, hey, that sounds pretty good at 3. You turn up to 4, hey, that sounds even better, you know? Before you know it, you're cranking it to 8, and people's like, turn it down. But that's why, you know, it's because it's designed, it's kind of like a hot rod, you know? The more you rev up that engine, the better it sounds, and that's how tube amps are kind of designed. I kind of look at them like a hot rod amp, you know? That's great. If you haven't played through tube amp, I'd highly recommend you check that out, okay? So that's one of the things that's great. And another thing that's great about the tube amps is they're louder at the same wattage as solid state. Like for instance, if you were to take like a 30-watt tube amp as opposed to a 30-watt solid state amp, the 30-watt tube amp would be louder, okay? And like I said, so you turn it up louder, and so you're gonna get more out of a lower wattage from a tube amp than you are from a solid state. So that's something to think about too, okay? And you could buy like I have a 7-watt tube amp that just is incredibly loud, but if it was a 7-watt solid state amp, it wouldn't be as loud, and when I tried to turn it up past a certain threshold, it would break up and wouldn't sound good. So if you're going for that, you know, you could buy a smaller wattage tube amp and get more sound out of it, get that more of that loudness out of it, and then of course when you turn it up, it's going to sound better, and then even when it distorts, it's going to sound even better, okay? But once again, that's kind of the way it is. And then another thing about the tube amp that's great is you get a warm tone. You get just that warm, natural tone that you don't really get from a solid state amp. Solid state amp gives you kind of more of a synthetic amp, but then like I said, they are getting better at today than they used to be 20 years ago, and they'll probably be better, you know, in another 20 years from now, okay? But those are some of the things to think about with tube, okay? Now the cons, the bad things about tubes amps is, number one, they're more expensive, okay, because of the fact that you got the transformers and the glass tubes in there, so they cost more to make, which means they're going to cost more to buy, okay? So that's something to think about as well, okay? Depending on your budget, if you have kind of a low budget, you might want to start with solid state. I remember when I first got started, I didn't have any money, so I bought a solid state amp, and I was trying to play in bands, and people kept telling me, dude, you got to get a tube amp, because it just wouldn't keep up with the other guys, the other guitar players' tube amp, you know? It just, you could tell a big difference, and so eventually I had to get a tube amp. I eventually got a Marshall, which is what I wanted, you know, but it took me a long time to get that, to afford to be able to buy that, because those things were so expensive. They've come a lot down in price today, but back then they just didn't have those options, you know. So I eventually got one, but I remember the first time I went to the music store and I plugged into a tube amp. It was, I think it was a Marshall JCM 800. I could see very clearly the difference, you know. It just had that nice natural warm sound that, you know, the solid state didn't have. So, you know, and that's why it was a lot more expensive, the tubes and the transformers and all that stuff too, okay? So once again, it's going to be more expensive. Okay, the second thing is that it's going to be a lot heavier as well, because those tube amps always have the transformers, the big old transformers in there, and the tubes. You got the power tubes and you got the preamp tubes. Okay, on your lower wattage ones, you won't have as many tubes, but if you have like a 100-watt head, you're going to have, like, you know, 4 power tubes and a few preamp tubes, and then the transformers. So that's going to give it just a lot more weight. Plus, they're constructed really well with good wood and stuff. So that's something to think about too, if you want to be hauling around a refrigerator, you know, because some of those, they can be pretty heavy. So that's something to think about too. Okay. And the other thing, the other con about the tube amps is they don't really sound that great at low volume, you know. So if you live in an apartment or something, now once again, like I said, if you get a lower wattage tube amp, you might be okay, which they didn't really have those back in the day. You know, nowadays they have like 5 watts, 1 watt, 10 watt, you know, 7 watts, that kind of stuff. They didn't have it back then. Back then it was like 50 watts, 100 watts, you know. So if you lived in an apartment, you know, you wouldn't, you know, by the time you crank that up to where it sounds like what you want it to sound like, it's too loud, you know. So nowadays with the lower wattage ones, you can kind of get that sound you want at a lower wattage. So you might be okay there, but tube amps are always known to sound better when you turn them up. They don't really sound so good at a lower volume, although they're kind of correcting that problem now with the hybrids and the lower wattage. Okay, so those are some things you want to think about, you know, depending on your situation. If you're playing in a band, maybe playing in a rock band, you know, I would highly recommend maybe get you a tube amp, because of the fact that they cut through better, that you're going to be able to crank them up louder, you know, especially when you're playing with the drummer who's pounding the drums and hitting those zildjian cymbals, and you know, you need something that's going to cut through with that and keep up with that. So, you know, a tube amp would definitely do that, okay? Solid state do it too, you know, you just might have to get a bigger amp for that, but you could get, I have a little solid tube amp, sorry, not solid state, but a tube amp that it's small, but it's loud, and it definitely keep up with the drummer, okay? So that's something to think about as well, okay? But if you're looking at maybe just playing in your bedroom, you know, you're not playing in a band, then maybe just get like a solid state amp. You know, you've got the effects in there. They got all kinds of effects now in solid state amps. Or if you're living in an apartment or just, you know, kind of playing by yourself, you know, learning or whatever, especially if you're just learning, I would highly recommend that you start with solid state, okay? And then you can eventually move up to tube, okay? Because once again, like I said, tubes are more expensive. But like I said, it's kind of up to you. It's your personal preference, and I would highly recommend that you go to the music store, plug into both. Plug into a solid state, see how that sounds, see if it gives you what you're looking for, and then plug into a tube amp and see how you like that, and see if that gives you what you're looking for. So either or can be good depending on you and your situation, okay? So think about that. Solid state or tube, which one is best for you? Okay, so there we have a simple quick lesson on the difference between solid state and tube, and they're kind of similar. You just got to kind of figure what's best for your situation, okay? And I would, like I said, go to the music store, plug into one, plug into the other, and really determine the difference. If you find something you like, go online, check out some reviews, and see what you like, and you know, if that's what you want to get, then I would purchase that, and then you'll be set, and you'll be inspired to learn and practice and get better at playing guitar, okay? And if you need some help, be sure to check out my books. I've got books on Amazon and Kindle, and they're also in my eBay store, Dwayne's Guitar World, so you can purchase them on either Amazon or eBay. Okay, I've got books on how to get started playing guitar, whether you're playing electric or acoustic. I've got a book on how to improve your rhythm playing if you're, practicing rhythm. And I've also got books on how to play lead guitar as well, okay? And they're all located on Amazon and my eBay store, Dwayne's Guitar World. I'll leave you some links below for that, so check that out. And also grab my free training guide, Guitar Solo Secrets. If you're learning about guitar solos, it's going to show you some insider secrets on what you can do to improve your guitar solos and get better at playing guitar. And once again, I'll leave you the link below in that as well, okay? And if you need more videos like this, you need more help, be sure to check out my website at DwaynesGuitarLessons.com, where I got all kinds of blog posts and videos on all kinds of stuff related to playing guitar, whether it be acoustic, electric, music theory, rhythm, lead, whatever it is, getting started, all kinds of great stuff on there, okay? So thanks so much for being here, and like I said, if you got some value out of this video, please let me know in the comments below. I'd really appreciate that. Until I see you on our next lesson, you, my friend, take care.